Let's take a look at all of the different features that we can add and apply to single item crafters. These machines are generally called condensers or compactors because they compact like iron down into blocks. But we can alter the function of these machines to better fit what it is we're trying to do. Because these one item crafters aren't just limited to turning ore into blocks to condense things. Most of the recipes in the game come from crafting single items, like bamboo into wood or sticks, melons, bricks, polished blocks, other block variants, walls and slabs and stairs. However, this won't work for single slot items, like bones into meal or flowers into dye. We need to handle those in a slightly different way, which we will talk about in a future episode. The most basic version of the one item crafter is super duper easy and compact. Let's use iron as an example. This would turn all of the ingots into blocks automatically. But for me personally, I don't want to turn all of my iron into blocks. I want to be able to just grab some ingots and go anytime that I need them, and not have to grab a stack of blocks and craft that back into ingots just to use. So what we can do is have another container specifically for the ingredient that we're using. So in this case, I can just grab some iron and go. But all of the rollover will automatically get crafted down into whatever recipe we chose. In this case, blocks. Regardless of the details, it all starts with the input. This could be the output of a farm, or something as simple as a hopper with a chest on top, pointed into a crafter to load the items. Now, the crafter itself will spit items that it crafts out of its mouth. So we need a container pressed up against its face. Then to activate the crafter, we need a comparator that is looking at it through a block. So this comparator is looking at that crafter. To power it, we can just place some dust to loop the signal back around, but we also need to compare the comparator by placing a second crafter that has all 9 slots locked. This will produce a signal strength of 9, being read by this second comparator going into the side of the first comparator. And what this does is the first comparator won't activate until the regular crafter is totally full, has 1 item in every open slot. And this is regardless of what pattern you choose. Like if we wanted to craft iron bars, we would lock the bottom 3 slots. But as soon as those top 6 slots are full, it will craft iron bars. So regardless of what recipe we want, we just lock the corresponding slots that match that recipe. But if we don't want all of the items to get crafted, we can start off with 2 containers, like a chest and a barrel, or 2 chests, either way. We want the crafter to be facing toward the top container. So this top chest is for the crafted item, but the bottom container is for the ingredient. So we want a hopper under the crafter pointed into that bottom container. As items are loaded in, the hopper under the crafter will pull those items out. So the crafter will not be able to stockpile things in order to start crafting until this barrel or this container is totally full and items back up into that hopper, allowing no more items to be pulled out. We can force this to happen by adding a lever that powers dust. That lamp could be any block, but this will lock the hopper under the crafter, allowing items to build up inside of the crafter, thus allowing it to craft. So the lever can tell it to start crafting items before that bottom container is full. Now, of course, to power the crafter, we're going to do this in the exact same way. We need a comparator that's looking at the crafter, dust that is looped back around, plus a side input that has a signal strength of 9. And there are many ways to do this. Just one of the easiest is by using a crafter that has all 9 slots locked. But now, if that lever is turned on, thus locking that hopper, or if the bottom container and hopper are totally full, the crafter will build up items and craft once it has 1 item in every slot. And again, whatever recipe you want the crafter to craft, you just lock the corresponding slots for that recipe. and it will craft that item. We can also move this side part to make it more compact. We can have a block with a dust on top next to the original comparator, and we can move the crafter that has 9 slots locked and its comparator off to the side. It will have a strength of 9, and so will that dust, because the comparator carries the strength of 9 into the dust. Always remember that you can move things around, but if you want more than one single chest, we can do that as well, except this time, our item intake line is going to be off to the side, and our crafter is going to be pointed up next to that line. So we're going to feed the items into the crafter from the side. Then we need our bottom container for the ingredient, a hopper under the crafter pointed into that container. Then we can add our optional lever locking if we want to. But now, depending on how many chests we want, we're going to place either 1 or 2 droppers pointed up on top of the crafter. 2 droppers pointed up is going to equal 4 chests. So we can place 4 chests here on the front, then place hoppers pointed into the backs of these chests, with a final hopper above the droppers pointed into that row. So the items go up, over, and then down. Now we're going to power the crafter in the exact same way as we've done before, by placing some blocks, having a comparator looking at the crafter, and then dust looping back around. But now this dust will power not only the crafter, but both of the droppers as well. So every time it activates, it will activate the droppers. But we still need to compare a strength of 9, so having a crafter with all 9 slots locked, powering the side of the original comparator, like so. So now, as items enter, if the bottom container is totally full, or if the lever is turned on, the crafter will start building up items. Just like last time. And then once the crafter actually starts crafting, it will spit its items up into the droppers. But the droppers will also be activated by the signal that triggers when the crafter crafts. So the items will go up, over, and back down into your chests. Now, if you want less than 4 chests, you just kind of shave off the top and turn the dropper to the side. That way the dropper is now pointed directly into this row of hoppers. And then you could shave off another layer and make it only have 2 chests. Totally up to you. But now one fatal flaw to the crafter is that if the container that it's trying to spit into is full, like this dropper is now full, if it tries to spit into a full container, it will poop its item on the ground. So if you don't notice that your storage is full, you could end up wasting tons and tons and tons of items because the crafter just doesn't know when to stop. So these last 2 designs that we're going to build are going to include overflow protection, where the crafter will stop crafting if your output is full. The build area is 3 by 5, regardless of how many storage chests you want. We're going to have our container and our locking lever down here at the bottom for our ingredient storage, but for your crafting storage, just pick how many chests you want. We're going to start off with the single chest design. We're going to place a hopper pointed into the bottom container, with a crafter facing off to the side, pointed into a hopper that is pointed into the chest. We need this hopper to have somewhere to read off of, so that we can tell it when to stop. Then we also need to load items into the crafter, either by attaching this to a farm, or a bunch of hoppers, or a single hopper with a chest on top. Whatever you want, however you want to load in the items. Place a solid block behind the crafter and diagonally down, so that we can place a comparator that is looking at the crafter through that solid block. Then another block so that we can place a comparator that is looking at this hopper right here. Then here on the other side, we're going to place 5 solid blocks starting next to the crafter, in this pattern, going from the crafter to this back comparator, so that we can place dust from that comparator over to the crafter. The crafter will be powered because it's touching the block that has dust on top. Then in this hole, we're going to place a block with dust on top, then a comparator pointed into that block, looking at a crafter that has all 9 slots locked. So that dust will have a strength of 9, which will prevent the original comparator from activating until it has a strength of 9, which will then trigger the crafter. Then over on this side, we want to place 2 solid blocks in these positions with dust on top of this first one, so that the comparator will power that dust when it's turned on, and then a repeater pointed into that hopper. So that repeater will lock the hopper when your storage is full. Then lock the corresponding slots for the recipe that you want this crafter to craft, and you're done. This will work the exact same way as the ones that we've looked at before. Items will drain into the barrel until the barrel is totally full, or until you turn on this lever. Once that happens, the crafter will start crafting. The difference is that once this chest is totally full and items back up into the hopper, so like if we break that chest, now as soon as that hopper has an item, it will lock the top hopper, which will essentially turn off the crafter. No more items will be loaded, thus no more items will be lost. But as soon as you open up space in the storage, it will all just start crafting again. Now you could even replace where the lever is with a hopper, and maybe load shulker boxes, or move the items somewhere else, or replace this chest with another crafter system, or whatever. But if we want to have more storage chests, we're going to build that now. So go ahead and place your containers and your optional lever if you want, and we're going to place a hopper pointed into the bottom container with a crafter facing up on top of that hopper, going into a dropper facing up, and then a dropper facing off to the side. Then hoppers pointed into each of these chests, and a hopper pointed into the side of the crafter, which is where we're going to load the items from. So if this is a farm, it'll probably go up, to the output of the farm. All the normal rules of hopper transporting is the same. You can replace every other hopper with a barrel or a chest to save on some materials, or you can just have a single hopper that you load items into, or, whatever you want. We're just loading items into the side of the crafter using a hopper. Then starting behind the crafter, we're going to place 4 solid blocks in this circular pattern, with a comparator looking at the crafter inside of this hole, like so. Then a dust on the back one, but a repeater on this front one. When activated, the comparator will power that dust, which will power this block, powering the repeater, which will activate the droppers and the crafter. But of course, we need to compare a strength of 9. So we need a dust going into the side of that comparator, then a comparator and a crafter with all 9 slots locked. Or you could technically use a dropper or a composter, anything that has a strength of 9. Just a crafter is easier to control the strength of 9. But now we need a comparator looking at this topmost hopper, then a block coming out of that comparator, going over here, diagonally down, and diagonally down again. Then 4 dust on top of these 4 new blocks, going from that hopper over to that comparator. So when the comparator is strong enough, it will power all of this dust, which will lock this hopper that's pointed into the side of the crafter, because that hopper is touching the block that the dust is placed on. Just remember that the dust doesn't have to be pointed into a hopper in order to lock it. That bottom one will be locked because the solid block next to it will have active dust on top. Now we have a few more options for how we build our single item crafters. I've also been working on a tileable version of this to fit inside of our personal storage, so that we can slide these slices into our storage systems to auto-craft items while still maintaining access to the base ingredient. I still have a few more things to work out, but it's something to look forward to. There's just so much we can do when it comes to storage systems and crafting, so many different options, that it's always hard to know what would be the most desirable build or the most desirable machine. But in the near future, we'll be going over the alternate version of this one item crafter. That is the one slot crafter, turning flowers into dye or bones into meal. But that's all we got for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, share, and subscribe. Let me know down in the comments what you plan on auto crafting. But always remember that you are totally awesome, and above all, don't forget to have fun. Bye bye!